We are on the bottom of page 285 about the saintly person really being aware of a spiritual essence that is always around him, the angels that surround him. Last week we talked about the Bas Kol, and the last thing we left off with is in this paragraph 16, do not be surprised that the saintly person declares before entering the bathroom, be honored in holy divine ministers. Give honor to the God of Israel, and depart from me while I enter and do my duty, and I shall return to you. Because he really feels that he's surrounded by these angelic beings, because he does feel that he is a creature that is a composite of both body and soul, and that his soul is being escorted by spiritual beings. He says this out of respect for the divine presence. When he leaves the bathroom, he thanks God by saying the blessing of Asher Yatzar. Asher Yatzar es ha'adam b'chochma. And so today we're going to spend a little bit of time with the Bracha of Asher Yatzar, which is really a beautiful and amazing Bracha, which unfortunately is sort of consigned to, when we do say it is consigned to second-class status, we don't say it properly and methodically enough. But the fact is, all you need to do is go and see someone who has disabilities in the area of their intestines, someone, God forbid, with Crohn's disease or other kinds of intestinal problems or urinary tract problems, and then really learn to appreciate what it means to have a healthy body that will expel waste product properly. How wonderful this blessing's content is, and how precise are its words for one who views them with a discriminating eye. The blessing opens with wisdom and concludes with, who heals all flesh and acts wondrously. So we'll spend a little time. If we can ask the cell phone to turn off, please. We'll spend a little bit of time on this bracha. The reason why, at face value, the bracha opens up with the words, Asher Yatzar es ha'adam b'chochma, that God forms man with wisdom, is because there is a tremendous amount of wisdom that went into the way that Hashem created the human body. And this goes back to what we said before, that a chassid, a pious individual, is able to look at all of the limbs of his body and recognize that there's something wondrous going on. He looks at all of the inner workings. Before we were talking about the skeletal structure and the relationship between the muscular skeleton and the muscular system and the skeletal system and the nervous system, and how my body obeys my every command. Here, the chassid is looking at the intestinal system, the urinary tract system, and the way that the body deals with waste product, ingesting and expelling the things that the body does not need, taking only the things that the body needs and expelling the things that the body does not need. This refers to the wondrous system of expelling and retaining which God created in living creatures. The blessing includes all living creatures by saying all flesh, Rofei chol basar, umafli la'asos, that God heals all flesh and acts wondrously. So there are a couple of notes that I just wanted to point out in this bracha that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is highlighting. I just first wanted to point out that there are two verbs that are used in this bracha of Asher Yatzar. We say Asher, we thank Hashem, who is the Yotzer, Asher Yatzar es ha'adam b'chochma, uvaravo nekavim nekavim chalulim chalulim. And he created within man various holes and orifices within his body in order to allow him to retain and to expel different products that come in and out of his body. And the Meforshim explain that there is an inherent difference between bara and yatzar. Why do we start off the bracha with Asher Yatzar, which is a certain type of creation, and end off with the verb bara. Uvaravo nikavim nikavim, chalulim chalulim. The Meforshim point out that if you take a look at the bracha, the first bracha of Kriya Shema, which is based upon a pasuk in Yirmiyah, Yatzar or Uvarei Choshech, that God forms light and creates darkness. There too, the prophet utilizes those two verbs in two very different ways. Yitzirah is defined as active creation, taking something and forming it into something of substance. Light is substantive. It means that it's a creation of God that is visible and that it is an active creation such that without it, there is no light. With light, right? So God introduces light into the system of the universe. But God also creates darkness, but Bari'ah is the privation, is the removal of light. So therefore, the two forms of creation is active creation, of adding something into reality, and Bari'ah is taking away something in order to create the absence. And the truth is that just like in art, in order to create a beautiful portrait, you have to create different shades. You have to sometimes add color as well as remove color. So too, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the universe, he created by adding certain aspects to creation, like light, but also removing so that he could create darkness as well, so that life is a combination of both active and passive creation. In the same way, when we talk about man's creation, the human body, there is the active creation, Asher Yatzar Eta Adam, that God takes muscle and bone and all of the other organs and forms them. But uvaravo nikavim nikavim chalulim chalulim. But he is borei within man, orifices and holes and pores within man's body. That is the creation of a vacuum. You create a hole within the body, a tube or a coiled intestine within the body that has air in it, inside of it, so that it can allow for the vacating and the removal of the waste product. So that's not an active creation, that's a passive creation, like the creation of darkness. It's the removal of solid matter. It's the vacating of something of substance so that there can be room in the body for the excretion of undesired products from the body. Am I making myself clear? Am I communicating? That's the difference between Yitzirah and Biri'ah. And we thank in this bracha of Asher Yatzar, we thank God for both. I need to make sure that I have properly functioning intestines so that the intestinal walls are not punctured in any way. My esophagus is not punctured in any way. So that's the Yitzirah of my body. But I also need the proper Biri'ah of my body, because if there was an obstruction, God forbid, in my esophagus, in my intestines, in my colon, so then that would be just as harmful as if there was a hole in something that needed to be intact. So having an intact system is important, and having recesses within those intact systems is also equally as important. So that's the sort of the wonderment that we express when our body, thank God, is working correctly. We thank God for the things that are intact. Thank you for keeping them intact. And we thank Hashem for also allowing those parts that are supposed to be vacated from any obstruction for being free and clear and having holes in them in the proper places so that they can expel properly. And that's part of the wonderment that we express. Thank you, Hashem, for allowing my body to work the way it's supposed to work. Another idea that is, when we talk about light and darkness, is that if light represents taking the positive in, then darkness represents the expelling of that which is the negative. And that's really what our body does as well. Yotzer or uvorei choshech, Oseh Shalom Uvorei Torah. That's what Yirmiyahu HaNavi said, that God ultimately is the creator and maker of everything, both the good and the bad. And in a sense, man is a refinery, his body is a refinery, and is doing the same thing. Man is intaking good and expelling the bad. So we are too, in a sense, doing that creative process of both light and darkness every time our body processes material of this world. And this really leads into a discussion of the Shalah HaKadosh that I'd like to have with you on this Bracha of Asher Yatzar. But the first thing we'll see is the Medrash, which is often quoted in consonance with the Bracha of Asher Yatzar. It's a very brief Medrash from the very beginning of Bereshis Rabbah, for the very big opening of Medrash Rabbah. Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created. Now you'll notice that the verb that is first used for the creation of the world is bara, which is passive creation by causing the vacating of something. Why did the Torah choose to use that word? If ultimately most of creation is bringing something of substance into being. The Kabbalists tell us that really, instead of us talking about this world being created yesh me'ayin, creatio ex nihilo, creating something from nothing, really it's the creation of nothing from something. The way in which the Kabbalah describes God creating of this universe is God vacating in some way some of his essence, what's called tzimtzum, in order to leave room for a physical world to exist. And that's why the verb bara is used in order for the world to be created. But that's not really the theme of this medrash. Bereshis bara Elokim, Rabbi Tanchuma pasach. Rabbi Tanchuma opened up this pasuk as follows: Ki gadol ata ve'oseh niflaot, quoting a pasuk in Tehillim. You are great and you do wonders. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, hanod hazeh, im yihiyeh bo nekev kechud shel machat kol rucho yotzei mimenu. If you have a flask that is supposed to be both airtight and waterproof, if there's even one puncture the size of a needle, all of the air escapes from the flask and it cannot be used in order to hold air any longer. V'ha'adam asui mechilim mechilim nekavim nekavim. But a person's body is filled with orifices and pores and holes. And yet, ve'ein rucho yotzei mimenu, but his spirit never departs from him. The Medrash is describing man's soul as a type of airy spirit. Our neshama never departs, it stays attached to our body. Mi ya'aseh, who can perform such a miracle? Ata Elokim levadecha. You alone, Hashem. Now, of course, this is a very simplistic, perhaps even primitive view of the human body, but when you consider what the lungs are, consider what a lung is. A lung takes in air, and through semi-permeable alveoli at the base of the lungs, it transfers the oxygen into the bloodstream, oxygenates the blood through the air that we intake through our lungs, and for some miraculous reason, the blood does not back up into our lungs, and yet the oxygen is able to transfer into the blood through our lungs. It's an amazing system. It's an incredible system when you think about it. And this is what we are supposed to reflect upon. We can reflect upon the wondrousness of our bodies at all times, but specifically when we go to the washroom, when we have to perform bodily activities, is the most appropriate time to reflect upon the miracles that are taking place on a constant basis in our bodies. Yes?
I just wanted to ask about tzimtzum.
Yes.
You said nothing from something?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't really understand it so much. Like, is there any way of clarifying that? Like,
to the best of my understanding is the only way that I can. And I'm sure that I fall short in my own understanding. But the way that the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, describe it is that God actually withdrew his true essence from a corner of existence in order to allow the physical universe to exist. Because the physical reality pales in comparison to God, who is the ultimate reality. the only way that we can feel a sense of independent existence is, the only reason we feel that way is because God withdrew some of his true essence from a corner of that which, all of that which exists, and allowed that vacuum to be occupied by physicality. Okay? So that's the Buriah, that at least is one way of describing how Hashem created the world. What's also interesting is this Targum Yerushalmi that I have that is cited by the Shalah, which we'll see in just a moment. Bereshis bara Elokim, the Targum Yerushalmi, one of the ancient translations, the Aramaic translation, similar to Targum Onkelos, similar to Targum Yonatan, is the Targum Yerushalmi. And it says that the word Bereshit means not in the beginning, but rather with something did God create heaven and earth. And the word Reshit means Chochmah, according to the Yerushalmi. B'Chochmah Bara Hashem. God created the universe with wisdom. Based on that, the Shalah says that this is the connection between the bracha of Asher Yatzar, which also starts with Asher Yatzar Es Ha'adam B'Chochmah. Because man's body is truly the crowning achievement of creation, the ultimate objective, and man ultimately is a microcosm of all of existence. And that's the paragraph that I'd like to explore with you, this short paragraph in source number 4, which comes from the Sidur HaShalah. There is a Sidur called Sha'ar HaShamayim, and it contains commentaries either from the Shalah's own writings or from his students. And this is what the commentary to that Siddur states. Birkat Asher Yatzar hi dugmato mi birkat al netilat yadayim. So the first thing the Shalah writes on this bracha is that the blessing of Asher Yatzar that you say first thing in the morning, after Modeh Ani, you wash your hands 3 times on each hand, and then you say the bracha of al netilat yadayim, and then the bracha of Asher Yatzar, after assuming you've gone to the washroom. Most of us, when we wake up, we go to the washroom. So, Hi dugmato mi birkat al netilat yadayim haba'a letaharat etzbaot yadayim. He says the reason why these 2 blessings are said adjacent to each other is because they both address the same theme. The whole purpose of netilat yadayim is to purify the hands. Hamichuvanim neged shalmala kitipirashti kain. As I've explained, when we wash our hands, we are actually doing something metaphorical as well. Not only are we cleansing our hands from physical uncleanness that we may have accumulated over the night by touching ourselves in different parts of our body, but there's also a spiritual cleaning that takes place that is signified through the washing of the hands. Keinu bebirkat asher yatzar al taharat haguf mehagiul umehamotarot hanidachot chutza. The same thing can be said about any time we go to the bathroom. Whenever we go to the bathroom, we are also removing the uncleanness. We are expelling something that is unclean from our bodies. But that too is really a metaphor for what man's task is to do on a spiritual plane as well, to expel the uncleanness from oneself, from one's spiritual being. Can you imagine? When you go to the bathroom here on a physical plane, you're also supposed to be going to the bathroom on a spiritual plane, meaning that everything that exists in the physical world is a metaphor on some level for what's supposed to be happening on a spiritual plane. So what is going to the bathroom? We are a refinery. We take in aspects of the physical world and we expel the undesirable part. The same thing is supposed to be done on a spiritual plane where we take in certain metaphysical products into our body in order to nourish ourselves spiritually. And we have to also expel whatever part of that metaphysical existence which is undesirable. And the Shalah is going to explain what he means. Ki noda ha'adam na'aseh b'tzalmo b'dmut elyon b'chol tichunat evarav pinimiyot v'chitzoniot. Man is created in God's image. on both an external and an internal level. Hu kolel bidmuto v'tzalmo elyonim v'tachtonim kemo she'erachti b'drush hazeh b'ma'od ba'orach v'rocha v'omek. As I've already explained in great detail, man represents a composite of both the physical and the spiritual, what is known as the lower creation and the higher creation. He says, and I refer you to a very long exposition on that topic. Al kain, ha'adam tachlit ha'bariya, which means that man is the crowning achievement of creation, the ultimate objective. V'zehu asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chokhmah. And that's why we use the beginning of the bracha by saying that you formed man with wisdom. Kidichtiv kulam b'chokhmah asita. As the pasuk says, God, you have created everything in this world with wisdom. And man is a microcosm of everything. Uvereshit hu ma'amar ha'kolel kol ha'asara ma'amarot. Furthermore, the word bereshit that appears in the Torah is sort of a catch-all phrase to describe the 10 utterances which God used to create the universe. Mitargem betargum Yerushalmi bereshit b'chuk mita. And as we've just seen, the Targum Yerushalmi says that the word bereshit means that God created all with wisdom. V'hakol haya bishvil ha'adam. And everything in this world was created ultimately for the existence of man. V'hinei ha'adam b'demut u'v'tzelem elyon, asher alav ne'amar b'bisari echezeh eloka. Furthermore, man, being created in the image of God, has the ability to see both the physical side of himself plus the divine aspect of himself. And that is why the pasuk says that in my flesh I can gaze upon the Lord. That through my flesh, says the pasuk, I can gaze upon Hashem. We can see God within the very workings of our own body. Ha'adam shelamata kiviyachol rashum umerumaz neged ha'adam ha'elyon. And that is as follows, that man, even in his physical state, corresponds to a metaphysical man that exists on a metaphysical plane. V'gam lamala ha'hashpa'a af shehi zaka u'nikiyat tahora. And he says further, he says, divine influence or divine nourishment that God sends forth to man's soul, even though it is pure and it is completely desirable, mikol makom yeshba moteret haroi lahachitzoniot haklipot, kemo sheherich bazeh hapardes b'shar hatimurot beperek rishon. As has been explained in one of the Kabbalistic works, even on the metaphysical plane, when man ingests spiritual nourishment from the cosmos, from the metaphysical cosmos as it were, he still expels some aspect that is left for the klipot. In other words, when God created this world, this metaphysical and physical composite, he created it in such a way where even on the metaphysical plane, there is some thing that man must intake and expel as well. We call the expelling that man does from his body of the metaphysical components, we call those metaphysical components the klipos, the shells. Just like you would expel the husk from a piece of grain, like a kernel of grain. And he uses that analogy. And I'm just skipping a line. He says, Yisha'er sham psolet harbe uperesh. He says, it's like if you ingest even a pure grain that has already been pearled and husked properly, there is still waste product that the body expels from the body even after ingesting the purest food item. V'hinei hane'amar shebishat achilato achal hazu hama v'haperesh hahu elo lefi mitziyut hamazon kodem achilato hu davar hane'echal hahu yoter nakisha yachol lihiyot b'mitziyut muvdal mikol peresh mikol zu hama. He says, granted that when you ingest the food item, it may appear that it's clean, it may appear that it's been properly husked of any undesirable byproduct, but nevertheless, the body itself, man is a wondrous creation. He ends up intaking certain things, and only the things that the body can use are retained, and everything else is expelled. So basically, that's the way it works on the metaphysical plane as well. There are things which God shines down upon man and provides to man, even on a spiritual plane. Man has to take in that nourishment, whether it's Torah study or other metaphysical things that we're not even aware of, that we're oblivious to. And he does mitzvot, and he studies Torah, and he does all of those spiritual activities that provide him with nourishment. But even within the performance of mitzvot and the study of Torah, there is waste product that we have to expel. And however you're going to understand that, we'll leave that to your own commentary. But every mitzvah and every Torah study that we engage in, every spiritual activity that we engage in has some byproduct, has some undesirable that we have to expel as well. I'll just give you an example in my own realm of experience. When I do a mitzvah or I accomplish a piece of study, I attain a certain amount of pride in the accomplishment of what I've done, and that's part of the expelling that needs to take place. So I've ingested the spiritual nourishment of that mitzvah, and I have to expel the part that is the waste product of that mitzvah. That's really on a more humanistic level. I'm not sure if a makubal would agree with my analogy, but perhaps it's only an analogy and it's not the real thing that we're talking about. I think he's addressing something much deeper, but at least it's something for us to relate to. We are constantly ingesting and expelling. The body does it with food, and it's the most simplistic way of doing it. But the holiest of holy activities that I can possibly engage in, even the holiest of holy, always has some waste product that I must be conscious of expelling from myself. And that's why we recite that man is made b'chokhmah, because whatever's taking place on the physical plane must also take place on the metaphysical plane as well. So that's a small exposition on the Bracha of Asher Yatzar. The Shalah basic point is, let's be aware that as wondrous as the body is down here, it's really a metaphor for something even more wondrous that is taking place on a metaphysical plane, and we're supposed to be able to relate our going to the bathroom as a metaphor for the way that we're supposed to constantly live our lives, ingesting and expelling spiritual nutrition as well. And of course, the Bracha of Asher Yatzar, for many of us, came to life with an article that I first read in the 1990s when it was first written, called For Everything a Blessing. How many of you have read this article? For Everything a Blessing. No one has. Can I read it to you? I'll go very quickly, but it's worthwhile if you've never heard it before. When I was an elementary school student in yeshiva, a Jewish parochial school with both religious and secular studies, my classmates and I used to find amusing a sign that was posted just outside the bathroom. It was an ancient Jewish blessing commonly referred to as the Asher Yatzar benediction that was supposed to be recited after one relieved oneself. For grade school children, there could be nothing more strange or ridiculous than to link the acts of micturition and defecation with holy words that mention God's name. Blessings were reserved for prayers, for holy days, or for thanking God for food or for some act of deliverance, but surely not for a bodily function that evokes smirks and giggles. I'll just interrupt for just a minute. I teach the boys about, we have a bar mitzvah class in shul, and we always have a group of boys, and my role is to teach them about the tefillin. And the one way that I know that the boys will always be involved is I tell them one of the halachas of tefillin is you're not allowed to pass gas when you're wearing your tefillin. And it's an important halacha that they need to be aware of, but it always evokes the smirks and the giggles. Yes?
My grandson, who was in bar mitzvah class this year, came home and told us all about that.
Yes. See that? You see, that's the one thing they remember from the bar mitzvah class. It took me, so I'm just continuing the article. It took me several decades to realize the wisdom that lay behind the blessing that was composed by Abaya, a 4th century Babylonian rabbi. Abaya's blessing is contained in the Talmud, an encyclopedic work of Jewish law and lore, that was written over the first 5 centuries of the Common Era. I should point out that this was published in the JAMA Journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association. So that's why he's explaining things so simplistically. The Jewish religion is chock full of these blessings, or brachot, as they are called in Hebrew. In fact, an entire tractate of Talmud, 128 pages in length, is devoted to brachot. On page 120, or brachot 60b of the ancient text, it is written, Abaye said when one comes out of a privy, he should say, "Blessed is he who formed man in wisdom," and he basically translates the entire bracha of Asher Yatzar. An observant Jew is supposed to recite this blessing in Hebrew after each visit to the bathroom. We young yeshiva students were reminded of our obligation to recite this prayer by the signs that contained its text that were posted just outside the restroom doors. It is one thing, however, to post these signs, and it is quite another to realistically expect pre-adolescents to have the maturity to realize the wisdom of and need for reciting a 1,600-year-old blessing related to bodily functions. It was not until my second year of medical school that I first began to understand the appropriateness of this short prayer. Pathophysiology brought home to me the terrible consequences of even minor aberrations in the structure and function of the human body. At the very least, I began no longer to take for granted the normalcy of my trips to the bathroom. Instead, I started to realize how many things had to operate just right for these minor interruptions of my daily routine to run smoothly. I thought of Abaye and his blessing. I recalled my days at yeshiva and remembered how silly that sign outside the bathroom had seemed. But after seeing patients whose lives revolved around their dialysis machines and others with colostomies and urinary catheters, I realized how wise the rabbi had been. And then it happened. I began to recite Abaye's bracha. At first, I had to go back to my siddur, the Jewish prayer book, to get the text right. With repetition, and there were many opportunities for a novice to get to know this blessing well, I could recite it fluently and with sincerity and understanding. Over the years, reciting the Asher Yatzar has become for me an opportunity to offer thanks, not just for the proper functioning of my excretory organs, but for my overall good health. The text, after all, refers to catastrophic consequences of the rupture or obstruction of any bodily structure, not only those of the urinary or gastrointestinal tract. Could Abaye, for example, have foreseen that blockage of the cavity or lumen of the coronary artery would lead to the commonest cause of death in industrialized countries some 16 centuries later? I have often wondered if other people also yearn for some way to express gratitude for their good health. Physicians especially, who are exposed daily to the ravages that illness can wreak, must sometimes feel the need to express thanks for being well and thus well-being. Perhaps a generic, non-denominational Asher Yatzar could be composed for those who want to verbalize their gratitude for being blessed with good health. There was one unforgettable patient whose story reinforced the truth and beauty of the Asher Yatzar for me forever. Josh was a 20-year-old student who sustained an unstable fracture of his 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae in a motor vehicle crash. He nearly died from his injury and required emergency intubation and ventilatory support. He was initially totally quadriplegic, but for weak flexion of his right biceps. A long and difficult period of stabilization and rehabilitation followed. There were promising signs of neurological recovery over the first few months that came suddenly and unexpectedly. Movement of a finger here, flexion of a toe there, return of sensation here, adduction of a muscle group there. With incredible courage, hard work, and an excellent physical therapist, Josh improved day by day. In time, and after what seemed like a miracle, he was able to walk slowly with a leg brace and a cane. But Josh continued to require intermittent catheterization. I knew only too well the problems and perils this young man would face for the rest of his life because of a neurogenic bladder. The urologist was very pessimistic about his chances for not requiring catheterization. They had not seen this occur after a spinal cord injury of this severity. Then the impossible happened. I was there the day Josh no longer required a urinary catheter. I thought of Abaye's Asher Yatzar prayer, pointing out that I could not imagine a more meaningful scenario for its recitation. I suggested to Josh, who was also a yeshiva graduate, that he say the prayer. He agreed, As he recited the ancient bracha, tears welled in my eyes. I always get choked up at the last line. He says, Josh is my son. And that's the conclusion of the article. Wow. So anyway, that's a good way to finish our discussion of Asher Yatzar. Let's go into the Parsha.